Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Views on Vue. This week on our panel, we have Vue core contributor, Fritz.
Hello.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv. We've got a couple of guests with us. We have Thorsten Lunborg.
Close enough. Also core team member.
Nice.
The H is silent, yeah. Thorsten.
Oh, okay. And Phan.
Hi.
Are you also on the core team?
Yeah, I am. On those, I'm kind of invisible.
He does a
invisible.
lot of Dax work.
Nice. Hey folks, I just want to let you know quickly about Netlify. Netlify is a really cool system for hosting what are traditionally known as static sites. However, the real benefit that I've been finding is that I don't have to mess with the back end. I can just set things up. I build the website out. I've been using a system called 11DJS, and you just deploy it. And then anything that you have that you want to do, you can do on the front end. So if you want to pull in some kind of database with Firebase or something else, if you want to collect form data, Netlify provides all kinds of services that make it easy to do all that stuff. If you're trying to do serverless, they have a really, really neat serverless setup that will allow you to deploy your websites without having to deploy a backend, and it'll do some of the work for you. I just love it. So if you're looking for a way that you can actually deploy a website that only has front-end technology in it, gives you all the tools that you typically need for the back end without having to actually program the back end, then give them a try. Go check them out at netlify.com. So, Chris, you brought this one up. It was stuff that we don't like about Vue or stuff that drives us nuts about Vue.
Yeah, just the things we don't like about Vue. And, partly to, we often talk about features that we really like and how to use them. But just like any project, I'm sure people listening have had this experience like in their work building applications. Like sometimes you come up with ideas that seem like a good idea at the beginning, and then you eventually begin to regret them. Or maybe it's something that like some people on the team like and some people have mixed feelings about. So we have 3 core team members here to dish out the dirty details about some of the things that we don't like and some of the things that we notice some people in the community don't like as well.
Nice. So I'm pretty new to Vue. I've done some pretty simple stuff, so it's pretty straightforward to me. I don't know if I've gotten deep enough to really have anything that drove me nuts. So I'll just chime in on the stuff that you guys hate.
Sounds good. I think one of the biggest ones that is an unfortunate reality that An was talking to me about a little bit before the recording started was the reactivity system. So there are some caveats. An, do you want to go into more detail?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's documented on our website as well, that because at least in our current version of VueJS, the second version, because we use the object defined properties, Vue cannot detect the property addition or deletion. And I personally, I don't get a lot of a problem with this, but this is something that basically can be considered a limitation of Vue in its current form. And but in next version of Vue, in Vue 3, we will be replacing this with a proxy, and this limitation will be gone anyway. So, there you have it.
Yeah, so currently in Vue 2, you have to use Vue.set and Vue.delete in order to delete or add properties to an object or array. Otherwise, Vue won't know that anything's changed, and it won't appropriately re-render the pieces of your app that rely on that data. But in Vue 3, at least for the people who are using modern browsers and can use the version of the reactivity system that uses proxies, they won't have to worry about this anymore, which is really cool. Part of this, I have to admit, part of this is just so we can talk about cool stuff in Vue 3. Because a lot of the things that we don't like about Vue 2, like we are making better in Vue 3. The opportunity to make some light breaking changes also allows us to fix some things that we don't like.
Hey, at least you're not rewriting the framework. Not that I'm pointing fingers at any other framework out there.
No, yeah, it's definitely not a complete rewrite. It'll be a much gentler migration,
Well,
especially with some of the tooling.
It's a complete rewrite from the source, right? But not from
Oh,
the,
yeah.
concerning
But,
the API.
Yeah, exactly.
If you can call out, though, like, hey, we're going to put this new feature in, if it's a breaking change, can you just call that out?
Oh, yeah, obviously. Yeah, we will. I mean, for going from Vue 1 to Vue 2, I wrote a migration guide and a migration helper to list out all of the things that are changed and how to deal with them. And also the helper to scan your code base and automatically notify you of most of the things that would need to change in order to upgrade to the latest version. And we want to do the same thing with Vue 3, except make it even better so that it can actually rewrite a lot of your code for you if you give it permission to, so that you can migrate really, really quickly, like while your boss is on her coffee break or something.
Sounds good.
Yeah, some other things that we don't like about Vue 3. Thorsten, do you want to, or some things we don't like about Vue 2, rather. Thorsten, do you want to go into one?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is tripping me up quite often is that it's not really easy to wrap a component transparently. So in React we have now React has hook, so fighting a bit with my cat. Sorry.
For those who can't see, Thorsten is really like literally fighting with his cat, who's touching the microphone and stuff.
She's little, and she just found my microphone cord very exciting, so we had to fight over it. Anyway, so in Vue, we can do what React calls like higher order components in a way, but since we have a much more APIs, and since we have also different we have a lot more magic going on in a way, right? With like VModel, like all the modifiers that we're using and so forth. And so in React, you just have props. So it's basically wrap this component in another component and just take all the props that you receive and pass them down. And that's basically it, right? Whereas in Vue, we have the props that you have defined. You have like the attributes. You have special class and style properties that are differently, that are like taken care of differently. You have the scope slots and the normal slots. And so it's pretty...
Listeners.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things to take into account just to wrap one component into another component transparently, just to add a bit of like extra functionality around it.
Yeah. So is that something that's getting better in Vue 3?
Well, I think we're definitely trying to make it better. I think we're still discussing some of the changes that would be needed for this, like how we are treating the special class and style attributes, how we are treating the passing down props. One of the things that's definitely getting easier is today if we don't have props defined, then everything ends up in the attributes property, and you can't really distinguish it. Whereas now you don't really have to define props on the wrapper. You can just take in everything that the user defines or passes to the wrapper and pass it down to the children much more easily. I think this one we have figured out pretty well, but we're still debating some of the things, right?
Yeah, I mean, nothing is final until it's final, until Vue 3 is released. But yeah, what's probably going to happen, from our latest discussions is that like there'll be no more automatic attribute inheritance. Listeners will be included in attrs because, they will compile down essentially just to like on hyphen whatever the event attributes. And class and style, which formerly has been an exception to disabling attribute inheritance, will no longer be an exception, probably. That seems to be the consensus so far. All of these things could change. But the result is that when people want a component or element to just transparently like inherit all of the attributes and events that the component doesn't care about, they can just add a vbind attrs. And that's the only thing you have to do.
Yeah, but I'm pretty not excited. I'm pretty interested in the feedback that we're going to get once we have put this into an RFC, right? Because personally, I'm also a bit torn because I really like the convenience of like being able to easily style a component by just defining attributes on it that are not props. But I see that this also isn't really as straightforward in Vue 3 because we now will have fragments, right? We can't even rely on the fact that there will be a root element because in Vue 3, a component will be able to return multiple root elements. So which one is supposed to inherit the attributes that you define in the component?
Yeah, which is already the case with functional components that use a render function.
Right.
So this way we're just more explicit. And that's one of the big trends that I'm seeing in Vue 3. Like, by making things simpler, we're also making a lot of things more explicit so that some of the behavior now that is currently a little bit magical, as you described, is going to still be very easy, but like not magic, not something that's happening in the background. It's something you made happen.
Yeah. But like, I'm still pretty sure we have to like make this very transparent, explain it very well, like the advantages, because people like me who like to style components this way will also be, why are you taking this away from me, right? So let's see.
Yeah, I don't really see it as like taking something away from users, but allowing them to like decide and training them to decide like which is the element that should actually, which is the element or component that should actually like inherit everything.
Yeah, I'm playing a little bit of devil's advocate here, right? So, of course, I love what
you're playing the grumpy German.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I have one more thing about the transparent components that I don't really like.
Okay.
So right now, like when people want to add a listener to a root element, unless we bind all listeners with Vion listeners right now in Vue 2 to some element or component, then they have to use the native modifier. Yeah. And the native modifier basically does what attributes do by default, which is just allow you to listen to an event on the root element, which is a problem because it's not explicit. Like you can run into a lot of cases where like the child component doesn't realize that some parent somewhere cares about what its root element is.
Yeah.
And so for an input, for example, you might wrap that in a label. And then all of a sudden when, someone's listening for like a focus or blur event or something like that, that won't work as expected.
Yeah.
And so now it'll just be more explicit so that you'll define which element you want attributes and listeners to be passed to. And as part of that, we'll likely be removing the native modifier. I'd say almost definitely. I'd be very surprised if we didn't. So people can't shoot themselves in the foot like that, and make code that's harder to maintain.
Yeah, but actually, Thorsten's point about the component kind of reminds me of one thing that I cannot say I dislike about Vue, but and to be honest, I used to be a big fan of this thing. But the more I work with Vue, the more I come to kind of restrain from, keep me away from using it. And it's the Mixins in VueJS. So we all know what Mixins are like. Okay, it's like your code snippets that can be used across components, which is super convenient and easy to be reused. But the thing about Mixins are pretty harder to reason about, and it's very hard to debug, especially when your project get like scales up. And actually, Dan from the React team has a very good article called "Mixins Considered Harmful." It's like a 2-year-old article, but every point there is still very valid and on point. Things like, okay, when you have a lot of mixin applied to the same component, you have a hard time trying to figure out where all these methods and compute properties and data and props come from. And you have like named classes and so on and so forth. So, actually, this is one of the points that I'm making in one of my talks, if I'm giving talk in the future. And it's like be careful with mixins. And instead of using mixins, especially in bigger project, we should consider using another way to compose components. For example, we can use like higher order components, or we use slots, or we extract those methods in mixins into more reusable services. And in version 3 of Vue, we are having hooks. I'm not sure if we are still calling that hooks in.
Yeah, at least something inspired by the React Hooks API.
Yeah. And that would be a way for us to slowly move away from mixins. Actually, mixins are still there in Vue 3, and I think Evan has a very good RFC about mixins already, how to use mixin in TypeScript. But still, personally, at least I would keep a distance from mixins.
Yeah. So one of the dangers you're talking about, in mixins being difficult to reason about, is that when you add a mixin to a component, you don't really have any indication, just by looking at the component, like what that mixin is adding to the instance. Like, exactly. Is it adding computed properties or methods or what? What exactly is going on there? Yeah, that's a case where it's very implicit. There's implicit behavior being added, but we don't know what.
And then because it's so easy to use mixin, I got carried away. Like, okay, this is something that can be reused between the two components. Let's put into the mixin, easy that way. And as we move on, then we have a lot of mixins, and no one can tell what is coming from where anymore.
Yeah, when you're building apps, do you often use mixins?
I do use mixins, and I still have a few of them. But nowadays, I'm not adding more stuff into my mixins anymore.
Yeah, so I also use them. I think you can contain this problem if you're aware of it, right? And if you're like thinking about how, in what situations you're relying on them. So I have a few mixins that are actually dynamic mixins that are a function. So I have to define some options for this mixin that actually returns like the object with the data or the methods or the computed properties or whatever I'm trying to mix into my component. And usually if you have one of these mixins, it's great to wrap them in a function where you pass in options that define the properties that you're actually adding. So you can add quite some transparency if you are designing them in the correct way, and if the use case that you have actually allows for this, right? But that's not always the case, and you still often end up like with an intermediate computed property that you rely on to like aggregate some data, and it doesn't really make sense to expose this as an option to define the name. So you still have this problem of intransparency of the properties that you're actually mixing into the component, but you can limit it, right? You can limit the effect or the problem.
Yeah, I've done the exact same thing. When I use mixins, I always like to use it as a function where the API, so for example, if you're adding some properties from Firebase, you can say like add Firebase properties, and you can list the properties that you want to add, so that what that mixin is actually doing is much more obvious.
Well, yeah, if your function doesn't need access to the Vue instance, and if my function doesn't need access to the Vue instance or any properties there, I would just extract it into some service and reuse it that way, all right?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of using a mixin and bind function into a Vue instance.
And that's an alternate pattern in many cases that can work just as well. And be more explicit at the same time, and also be really like just JavaScript. There's no new concept to learn there.
It's interesting just to like think about how all of these patterns like changed over time, right? React had mixins, then this article came out that Phan talked about like mixins considered harmful, which was basically when React switched over to higher order components, which we talked about a little bit earlier. And turns out they had many of the same issues, right? Because if you wrap stuff in a lot of higher order components, you still end up with a central child component that gets a lot of props from somewhere, and you don't know where they're coming from, right? So then render props came out, which is basically scoped slots in Vue,
Right.
which adds like transparency because you're aware of where the props are coming from that you're using. But they also have the whole render props pattern that is very popular in React is not as useful in Vue as it is in React, mostly because you're restricting these props to the template, right? Because you add a component to your template which is exposing props as slot props to the children that you pass to it. So the component that has this component in its template can't use these slot props in a computer property, for example. And so we have some additional limitations to this pattern. And now React even forgot about this pattern and says the new way is hooks, right? And honestly, I think they're on the right track, because even though hooks seem very alien to a lot of people and are still a bit alien to me, I can totally see the use case or like the advantage, right? Because you're no longer restricted to, or you don't have these drawbacks, right? You know where stuff is coming from, and you don't have naming conflicts. You can just transparently write down all of the behaviors that you want to mix in, and they are all available.
Yeah, I think scope slot / render props still have like some really good uses.
Yeah,
for example, dynamically define a template and pass it down to a child using information that only the child has. Like in that case, you'll only ever need that information in the template or render function. But yes, something that I think you started to touch on a little bit with a hooks-like pattern is that unlike Mixins, they don't have the limitation that you can't use information passed down in props or defined in data or computed properties. So using an API like that, you could actually have some information passed in props and passed to this mixin. So the mixin is not only dynamically created at runtime, but the mixin is also like dynamic. Like its behavior is dynamic depending on like the behavior of the component and the data that the component has available, which adds a whole new layer of flexibility and opens up a whole array of options. It makes composability or composing like features and sharing them between components much easier.
Yeah, definitely. So we probably totally lost our host, right?
Oh, Chuck? Chuck,
yeah,
you still with us?
I sort of followed some of it, but yeah.
We are pretty nerding out, pretty much, pretty hardcore right now.
Scaling back a little bit, so we don't go too deep into like features that some people haven't even seen yet and may have trouble visualizing. Have you used filters in Vue, Chuck?
Not yet.
Thank you.
Have you used other template languages with some kind of like pipe syntax?
Yes.
In the template?
Mm-hmm.
So that's basically what filters are. They're basically like Vue's methods, but with a special pipe syntax that can make them a little bit nicer to read in a template. But I personally hate filters.
Sure about that. I remember you and me, there was this discussion when Evan decided to drop filter from one to second version of Vue, and I still remember there's an argument in the team from the two sides, the pro filters, and I was one of them until I got talked out of that idea by Evan, and now in hindsight, filter is, I don't know.
Yeah, I think I was complaining about filters really early on, and I think that's what eventually started to sway Evan's mind, although they weren't completely removed in Vue 3. Vue 2.
What is your problem with filters, just for the listeners?
My problem with filters in their current form, that there were other problems that have been fixed because they've been neutered in many ways from what they were in Vue 1. But a big problem is that they have a special pipe syntax that can only be used in templates. And it's also different from the pipe syntax proposal that is eventually, hopefully, going to be part of JavaScript.
Yeah.
I think stage 0 or stage 1 at this point. And I love pipes. I really do. I love pipes. I really want them in JavaScript. But I don't think it makes sense for there to be two competing like pipe syntaxes, between templates and regular JavaScript. And I also don't think it makes sense to have like another feature that people have to learn that really doesn't do anything that methods don't already do.
Yeah, but I think the convenience of filters are usually, they have a very specific job, right? And usually you have filters that are used all across your application, right? And the whole point is like to have a convenient way of formatting the output that you're using in your template. So it would be like, and since they have a special syntax in the template and are not methods on our component, we can keep them in a separate namespace, right? So I can have a method on my component that is called currency, and I can have a filter that is called currency. So
why would you want that?
Huh?
Why would you want that? That just seems confusing.
Because okay.
And they do different things?
Currency is maybe a problem, but like think of something like distance.
Yeah, why would you want two things with the same name that are actually different defined in your component?
Or two ways to do
because they do different things. Like I have a filter that is
but that would just confuse me.
That is formatting like a number value into like 1 meter or 2 meters or 1 mile or 2 miles. Of course, that's an example that is like more generally solvable with like just a pluralizer. And at the same time, my component might or might not have, because this is like a filter that I will use all over the place. It might have like a data property that's just called distance or just currency or whatever. Like the alternative would be to either define an arbitrary namespace that is like dollar filters, blah, 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 or to like mix in all of these filters that you usually want to use all over your component into each component and register them as methods with a name that is fitting for this component. So I can understand what convenience people see in them, right? I'm not very attached to them, so if we would one day be losing them, I wouldn't really be crying or anything. I just can't understand the convenience to a certain extent.
Yeah, I still think like there's a reason that like data and computed properties and methods like all exist under the same namespace in a Vue component. It's because you don't want like two concepts and properties also having the same name. And I've seen this pattern so much, like when I was building React apps, where there's like a prop with a certain name, and then people want to, they're basically using that as like the initial value, and then in state, they're setting that initial value, and then that's the thing that actually changes. And so these are two different things, but with the same name, and that leads to a lot of laziness, and it leads to problems and misunderstandings. And in Vue, what you're forced to do is actually, call this initial value like initial value, so that when you're using it, you understand that this is only the initial value you're passing in. And if you pass in a new value, it's not going to update.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing about filters is, in Vue, at least from my in my knowledge, everything serves a distinct purpose. Like compare property is there for purpose, props or methods, but then filters can totally be replaced by a method or by a compare property. It doesn't have its own like place there, and because like filters are just methods anyway deep down, and then the reason why I was pro filters before was exactly that. It is so convenient to use filters. But then I stopped using that since Vue 2, and I don't miss them so far. Not at all.
Yeah, basically because of the pipe syntax, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like it too. It's just, it doesn't make sense for us to invent new syntax within JavaScript that can only be used in templates, I think.
And another thing that has really just crossed my mind is if you would use like methods for formatting stuff, then you wouldn't know from looking at the template that like methods usually or often what I'm referring to conceptually, like you often have
not quite.
You often have methods that are like manipulating data, setting new values to reactive properties, something like that, right? Whereas a method that is supposed to work like a filter has to be pure. Like if it gets a value in, it returns a value, and it doesn't really change anything about the component state because that would lead us into an endless loop, right? And so conceptually, it's like nice from looking at the templates and see, oh, that's a filter, and not it's a method. What does that method do? I hope it doesn't do anything shady. I hope it just works as a filter. From looking at it, it seems like it's just formatting the value, right? Of course, you can then name this method accordingly, like format as currency. So when looking at the template, you see, this is a method that is formatting this as a currency.
Yeah, that's a problem I haven't actually encountered in reality. Like, as long as you give things a sensible name, you don't run into that confusion.
Sensible names can get long, and it's much shorter, like pipe syntax spam, right?
Yeah, but okay, if you're worried that okay, methods, people look at methods and expect data to be changed, then we have side effects there. Then it's where the computer properties can step in, because by right, and if we don't have setters in computer properties, then it's a pure function, right?
Yeah, computer properties as formatters have their own limitations because you can't really use them in like for loop, right?
And in the rare case where, like, let's say somewhere in the template you really want to combine like 3 different formatters, you could just create like a new method that combines those behaviors, to make it briefer in the template, but also still descriptive. And it would even be shorter, very likely, than what the pipe syntax would give you.
Okay.
Talking about computer properties, I remember one thing when I look at the APIs of VueJS, and it's kind of bothered me, or still bothering me nowadays. Like, if you notice, like every property in the Vue options, like methods, we have the plural noun, we have data, we have props, but then computed out of the blue from nowhere. I mean, shouldn't it be computed properties?
That would be too long, though. That's so much to type. We're lazy, right? Exactly. That's what we learned from the filters discussion.
I don't understand why computed and not computed properties, but if we really go for a more standard and it shouldn't
to play devil's advocate, computed isn't necessarily singular or plural.
Yeah.
So it could be interpreted as plural.
Yeah, maybe it's my English, but computed doesn't sound like a noun now. You got what I mean? It's not a noun.
No, yeah, you're right. It's strictly like not a noun, but yeah, language is fluid.
Yeah.
But I mean, speaking of computed, one of the things that I don't really like is that in components, we have computed properties. And then in Vuex, we have getters. And a lot of people don't realize this at first, but like computed properties and getters actually work exactly the same.
Yeah. They are the same, basically.
They are the same feature, yeah. They both will like compute some value and then cache that value until some reactive dependency is changed.
Mm-hmm.
But we call them by 2 different names.
I think that the original intent was like in a computed property, you access all of the components, state or methods and whatever, like via this dot my state property, whereas the getters are designed as pure functions that receive the state and other getters as arguments. And so if you called them, hey, we have computed properties and components, and we also have computed properties in Vuex, but they work a little bit differently, but they are the same, that would also be kind of confusing, right? So
I think it'd be far less confusing.
You think so?
I do think so. Yeah, because I think it makes sense for them to work, like for them to basically just like take different arguments. And in that context, like them taking different arguments, like does make sense.
Okay.
So you'd have to think about that a little bit, but really just knowing that these are fundamentally the same concepts is the biggest thing that I see people struggle over. And so one of the changes that we might be making in the future to the Vue ecosystem as a whole is consolidating, the language for computed properties and getters, and maybe calling them something like computed getters, I think is perhaps the most popular idea right now, when we've been discussing it internally.
Sorry, what did you say? What is the most popular?
Computed getters. So sort of combining them, because the getters says something useful, right? It says that like this is a function that we access as a property. That's what a getter is. But the computed part is also useful, letting it know that like we compute this once and then we cache it until we need to compute it again.
Yeah.
So that they're both useful. And so like calling them both, whether we use computed or getters, but then like referring them in documentation as computed getters, I think will be useful. And I would guess that we'd probably move to computed everywhere rather than getters everywhere, simply because components are used more than state.
Definitely.
And the computed part is really vital for people to know.
Yeah. That's the main distinction between, or that's what makes them so useful over normal methods, right? The computed part.
Mm-hmm.
That's more or less related to convention, which brings me back to Tia's suggestion from the beginning of our session today. And so basically she was often asked about the things to improve in Vue is more strict convention for the project structure. Chris, you have this Vue boilerplate, enterprise boilerplate, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's quite popular. So I'm quite surprised that people still think that Vue needs more strict convention on this topic.
There are some boilerplate projects that are even more strict and have like more conventions and make more assumptions about the kind of application that you're building. I think Vue CLI itself, or at least Vue CLI 3, like already does quite a lot in giving you some basic structure that will like work out of the box, so that you just don't have to make a decision about like, what am I going to call this folder, or where am I going to put this file, that kind of thing. And I try to take that a little bit further in Vue Enterprise Boilerplate while still making relatively few assumptions. Like I use Vue Enterprise Boilerplate for most of my client projects when I'm like greenfielding an app. And so it's important to me that I'm actually going to be able to use it with relatively little modification. And then, yes, some people, want something much more opinionated. So for example, if you're not working with enterprise so much and legacy systems, you could decide, okay, this is a project that is always going to use GraphQL for all its APIs. And there are some advantages in like being able to make that assumption, right from the beginning. There's less boilerplate work that you have to do. And you can decide that, you're going to like handle layouts in a certain way. And that gives you certain freedom to just like get to work. That's one less decision you have to make. And I think Nuxt does a lot of good work with this too. Nuxt is sort of a framework on top of Vue that offers people a lot of strong conventions when that's what they want. So a lot of times, like when people say like, Vue Enterprise Boilerplate isn't opinionated enough for me, I say, go check out Nuxt. But yeah, we try to find a good balance of providing a lot of flexibility so that you can really build the apps however you want, while at the same time providing some good defaults so that you don't have to make the choices if you don't want to. And that's something we're constantly, trying to get better at. And I think we are getting better all the time. But it is a fine balance.
Yeah, definitely. So what else don't we like? Back to topic.
Well, I mean, I think that was on the topic too. Like a lot of people don't like how unopinionated Vue is.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, I guess, going back to like the computed properties and getters discussion, there's another case where we have two concepts that are essentially identical, or really they are identical. They have two different names between components and Vuex. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No, sorry. Come again.
State and data.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, sure.
They're the same thing. In fact, state is just using Vue's internal reactivity system
Yeah.
to set it up exactly how data set up.
Yeah.
But we call them two different things. And so this is another case where in the future we'll probably consolidate. And I'm thinking it will probably be on state because that's what's used more broadly in the ecosystem. So it'll also help for people coming from other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we even in our docs more than once we refer to that as the state of the component, and then we have data. Here you change the state of the component by putting some data into.
Yeah. So people just have to remember, and that's so confusing, especially for people who aren't native English speakers. They have to remember, like, all of these things can actually mean the same thing, or sometimes one word can mean a lot of different things. Like I remember when I was first learning web development, and I learned about the word server, and I learned first, like, so the server is the physical machine that my code is running on that serves the website, right? And that's why it's called server. And it's like, well, it can also be the application itself. It can also be the software.
Oh, isn't that server software like Apache?
Like a web server?
The web server, yeah.
Yeah. So it can be the machine itself, like the actual computer, or it can be the software. And then when people are talking about it, you're not sure which one they mean. And sometimes they don't mean, they'll talk like about like, some framework like Rails, and they'll call that like a server framework. Or they might refer to the server as like the specific part of Rails that handles web stuff. Or the server might be like Nginx or like some other like higher level. Or the server might be the box. And I hate that. That confuses me so much, and it makes it so hard to talk about things.
Or it could be the container that's running on the box.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Well, for me, I myself, I refer to Nginx and Apache and the like as web server. So
yeah,
confused by that. But yeah, you're right. Servers. Yeah. Well, I've heard server and web server used interchangeably in the way that Chris is talking about too. Mm-hmm. So people make different distinctions with the two terms.
Yeah, and I think overall we do a pretty good job of using consistent language in Vue, but there are places where we could do better. And the ecosystem is constantly evolving too. So, I actually, I'm actually kind of annoyed that React hooks are called hooks, because we already have something called lifecycle hooks. And lifecycle hooks are like what people generally think about as hooks. Like in programming, like there's some kind of event that you're hooking into. Mm-hmm. And React hooks really are completely unrelated to anything that has previously been called hooks, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
Because React is so popular and React hooks are going to become like better and better known, we'll probably change the documentation eventually to call these lifecycle functions, so that people don't see hooks and think like, oh, is this like React hooks? Because we do live within this greater ecosystem. So we have to be consistent with that as well.
It's so unfair to the lifecycle functions or lifecycle hooks.
No, functions. We're saying functions now.
We were there. We were there first.
Yeah. But I mean, I think, as the less popular framework, you do have to be aware of, how other people are going to be thinking about these words and how the language is evolving, and language does evolve.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This episode is sponsored by Sentry.io. Recently, I came across a great tool for tracking and monitoring problems in my apps. Then I asked them if they wanted to sponsor the show and allow me to share my experience with you. Sentry provides a terrific interface for keeping track of what's going on with my app. It also tracks releases so I can tell if what I deployed makes things better or worse. They give you full stack traces and as much information as possible about the situation when the error occurred to help you track down the errors. Plus, one thing I love, you can customize the context provided by Sentry. So, if you're looking for specific information about the request, you can provide it. It automatically scrubs passwords and secure information, and you can customize the scrubbing as well. Finally, it has a user feedback system built in that you can use to get information from your users. Oh, and I also love that they support open source to the point where they actually open sourced Sentry if you want to self-host it. Use the code devchat at sentry.io to get 2 months free on Sentry's small plan. That's code devchat at sentry.io.
Like, this is totally unrelated to Vue, but it's like, it just crossed my mind. As a not native speaker, like, all of these words, all of these phrases that we're using to describe terms, things in like computer science, like the host, to me, it's like, it's a special term. To a native speaker, a host is like the person in whose house I'm currently at, right?
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, does it ever confuse you, or are native speakers just like totally compartmentalizing these things in their minds? Like, personally, as a German, the translation of host is Gastgeber.
Yeah.
And so it would confuse the hell out of me, like to talk about the server and say, oh, I have to change the Gastgeber address. Like, nobody would ever say that in German, right? It's we have the English word host is like the machine where the server or where the software is running on, right? And so I'm always wondering, like, do native English speakers ever wonder why they use these real life terms to describe computer things?
Well, I think sometimes like it's an analogy that's supposed to be helpful.
Yeah, sure.
And I think host is one of those examples.
Yeah.
And like host is like where something is living, I guess. Like it's home. So I can see that, but it also is confusing. Like when you talked about Gastgeber, for those who don't speak German, and there might be a few people, I think, An, are you still living in Munich?
Yeah, I am, and I know what Gastgeber is.
So you do speak some German, okay.
The Gastgeber.
Yeah, it literally means guest German.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, if you were thinking of that as like guest giver, it wouldn't make any sense to you because it's just too literal what that role is and too specific to like the human part of that role.
Yeah.
But then it's German, so I can't say I'm surprised.
But sometimes it does get confusing. Obviously with like server where, it's a little bit too vague where there are just like so many things that could be serving. So it's like a bad variable name. If it's not specific enough, then you can confuse it with a lot of other concepts that are similar.
Yeah.
But naming things is hard.
Yeah.
I think whether you're a native speaker or not, a lot of it gets confusing.
Like server-side rendering.
Yeah, but the other thing is that given certain contexts, right? So if you're strictly front end, if you're talking about the server, all of those things can be correct, and it doesn't really matter because you're making a call back to it. If you're working on things in a different way, you're working on a back-end system, then the server distinction becomes more meaningful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are some computer sciencey like terms that I definitely agree are not helpful in clarifying for almost anybody. For example, higher order components.
Mm-hmm.
So higher order components, from what I've seen, people use it to refer to two different concepts, partly because it's kind of confusing. Either a component that returns another component or a function that returns a component. And both of those are basically the same, are almost the same amount of syllables as higher order components. So why don't we just say those when those are the things that actually make sense to people? Like we're saving like maybe like 1 or 2 syllables and confusing people more instead of providing a clarifying explanation.
I've also heard people call those HOCs or hawks.
Yeah, higher order component. Yeah, it's.
Oh yeah. When people start calling them hawks, so that you really have no idea what they're talking about. Like there's abstraction on top of abstraction on top. Like there's the confusing term turn into an acronym and then pronounce like the bird.
I was just about to say that. Yeah. What does the bird have to do with anything?
Hawks, not react hooks. This could get bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's all those naming terms and those English native words are really a pain in the backside for me when I translate the documentation of Vue into Vietnamese. They are just not translatable. Things like from a simple things like a file or hooks or even reactivity, we just don't have those terms in Vietnamese at all. And like I believe more than once, I need to go ask Evan or Chris a way to instead of translate the word or the phrase word by word, we change a bit and still be able to convey the meaning or the most of it to the Vietnamese readers. Or I even, because I know a bit of Chinese, I even go to the Chinese documentation website and try to extract the word from it, because Chinese and Vietnamese, basically we share the same root when it comes to languages. So sometimes I was able to extract a word from the Chinese documentation and use it for the Vietnamese version, but most of the times I'm not so lucky. So one thing, documentation management is really a pain.
Yeah, but a lot of times those discussions actually lead to better English documentation. Because if there's something that's difficult to translate, then it's very likely going to be something that will confuse a lot of people who don't speak English as a native language, and possibly also people who do speak English as a native language.
Yeah, that's a good point, yeah.
I mean, but there are things that you cannot change. For example, okay, Vue's tagline is the progressive JavaScript framework. Progressive is something that's not translatable.
I would have problems translating it to German as well. I think I could find some word that is like conveying the meaning of the word progressive itself, like you would find it in the dictionary, in the English dictionary. But that translation wouldn't really do justice to what you are trying to convey with it in the context of like computer technology or like progressive applications or progressive complexity, right? So like progress is like I can find textbook translations for those in German as well, but they don't really make that much sense, right?
Yeah, even when a literal translation exists, the cultural connotations can be very different.
For us European people, or like all of the Western Hemisphere that is like sharing at least the same alphabet, right? You can like just accept that this is like a special word, like progressive, and you just take it as a word that is from another language and you understand the meaning, and you just incorporate it into your jargon, into your job's collection of special words. But I could imagine that it's considerably worse for people that have a language like Chinese or Vietnamese, who has also like kind of the same alphabet with like totally different like additional characters and stuff, to like accept the literal Western world word progressive to mean something, right? Like I can't translate it to German one by one, but I can like accept, I can read it, I can interpret it, I can remember it when I see it, I can recall what it's referring to because it's familiar. But I think somebody who is only used to reading Chinese would be totally thrown off, because I couldn't remember a Chinese character if my life depended on it, right? I just couldn't, right?
Yeah. But I think I have maybe two more things that I could talk about. I think one of them is related to VModel. So on components by default, VModel will listen for an input event. And what I'll find myself doing in components is almost always like using the model option to change the event to update, so that it doesn't like override the behavior of the native input event. Because I want, like, we were talking about the transparent wrapper component pattern. Like, if you want this base input component to act exactly like an input, then you can't override the input event to not return an event object, but to return like a value directly.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's inconsistent. So in Vue 3, we'll also be making some changes, probably changing that to like a model update event or something like that by default.
I think I haven't really seen that as a big problem yet, but I can totally see it now that you explained it. Yeah. But while we're at this point, like I saw that you started like a few experiments in a repo with a colleague or with a friend of yours or whatever concerning like code mods.
Oh yeah, code transforms.
Yeah, which is I think would be also a little bit interesting thing, because somebody hearing what you just said would be like, okay, it makes sense to rename the event, but now I have to go through all of my components and rename all of the $emit input to $emit update or something. And what is your feeling concerning how many of those little changes that we are going to have will be upgradable through some kind of code mod or some kind of like transform?
In the vast majority of cases, we should be able to read user intent to know like what it is they were trying to do. So in the case that you just talked about, for example, where someone's emitting an input event and they haven't changed, what that event is for VModel, and they're obviously returning like target value, or they're emitting target value. So like they're obviously doing this for VModel.
Yeah.
In those cases, we know exactly what the user is trying to do. And so we'll be able to rewrite the code for them with their permission. We always want to prompt so that people like realize what's changing. But like when we like show them the change that's happened, we can say like, do you want us to just fix this for you? And then they can say yes. And then we'll fix it everywhere in the code base.
Yeah. Once work on this tool starts, I will really be interested to look at this repository, because from time to time, I always try to like figure out how all of this AST manipulation stuff works that like you do with Babel or like Esprima or whatever these tools are that people are using. And this is really an area where I still feel totally lost, right? Yeah. So I'm really just looking forward to watching over you guys' shoulder, like seeing what's going on there.
One of my big tasks after VueConf is to go through and break out that work so that we can parallelize it as much as possible and get some basic code mods in place to help people realize like how to use all the different tools that you might want to use. Because we want to do this for like a lot of different languages too, and translate between like, like TypeScript and Babel and ES5 and things like that too. So we'll be able to use these code mods in the docs to basically give you whatever example you want to see, like whatever version.
Oh, that's meta.
so we'll still have the ES5 examples by default, to be accessible. But if like, what, I'm going to be building all my applications in like an environment where I'm using like Babel and Webpack and stuff like that, or an environment where I'm using TypeScript, then you'll essentially just be able to toggle, and all of the examples will change to that, and we'll like remember that for you, so that next time you visit the docs, it'll also be using your preferred examples.
Nice. Yeah. I really must admit that when we started talking about all of these changes and optimizations that we are trying to bring into Vue 3, I always was kind of worried, like, what is the level of added value, like, for example, renaming this event compared to the level of work or pain that we are introducing to users. Specifically because I really didn't have any feeling about how many of these things we can automate with these tools, right? So, and I'm still in the process of, when we have these discussions, of playing a little bit of devil's advocate, like I know we will never end up where Angular 2 ended up. Never. That will not happen, of course. But one thing that I really admire about React is like that the amount of breaking changes that they had throughout the recent years is like basically non-existent, right?
Well, I would disagree with that.
They had a few changes concerning lifecycle hooks, when they had React 16, I think.
And there were also like issues with decorators and.
But whoa,
and then I was told to like stop using create rect or rect.create class at some point.
Well, you were told,
and then moving.
They were no, that's different. They were deprecated, but they still work.
Mm-hmm.
They still work in React 16. You don't have to change any of that code.
No, but what's the difference when everyone's telling you, but seriously, don't use it?
That you don't have to rewrite your application. You can start writing the fresh parts or all the parts that you are touching anyway with the new syntax, but you don't have to like touch stuff that is totally working fine, that there's no reason to touch at all, just to like change it, right?
In a lot of cases, developing React apps, that just wasn't the reality. Like I had to. Like when people started using decorators on classes, it's like, well, I can't use the decorator if I'm not using a class, so I have to move to classes. And there are a lot of cases like that where it's like, oh, it's you can technically still do things, but then you can't use like all of this. You can't participate in the ecosystem in the same way, and you can't use examples like you could before.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Translate everything back, so it ends up creating more work for you overall.
I think we still have to watch out for this, and the point that I think I'm also not so worried about like. Worried is the wrong word, right? And I don't want to sound negative, but we just have to keep the ecosystem in mind, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like, if we have code mods to update an application, that's super fine. But once we introduce enough changes to like break a significant number of go-to libraries, and I'm not talking about the big ones like Modifier or something, because we are already cooperating with these guys, like getting their feedback, and they will have enough time to like update this big fantastic component library that they're building to Vue 3. But like the ecosystem of Vue 2 is like at a place where we have a real great selection of high quality libraries, components, plugins available to us, right? And just thinking about the fact that we are totally rewriting totally changing the virtual DOM API, right, will mean that every library out there that is using pure render functions won't work in Vue 3.
Without taking a few seconds to run the code mod.
Yeah, but you have to nudge every one of those authors that maybe didn't touch the code in like half a year because this thing just worked,
the only
right?
Thing that I think we are making it really as simple as it could be.
Of course.
So that if someone wants to like fork something that isn't being maintained, they can do that, and within a few minutes, like have a working version ready.
Sure.
So if a library isn't being maintained, it isn't being maintained, and that's a problem even beyond whether you're moving to a new major version or not. But moving from Vue 1 to Vue 2, it was really important to us at least for me, because like I'm a consultant and I'm working on like a lot of different applications. And so if migrations are painful for like an individual user maintaining like one or two applications, I can promise you it's much, much, much more painful to me. and so like I am the end user. I'm thinking about the end user because I'm going to suffer like possibly more than almost anyone out there if it's not a smooth migration process. And so for Vue 1 to Vue 2, I made sure the migration helper worked for libraries, for applications, and even for blog posts, so that you could scan a markdown file and it would update your examples. And we want to offer the same kind of convenience to people for Vue 3. And actually, I lied, not the same kind of convenience, even better.
Yeah.
Because we want to not only tell you about what needs to change, but automatically change it for you.
Yeah. It's just another level of complexity, right? Like if you have a code mod that can just update all of your source code in your project, that's amazing. But if there are all of these dependencies that you just have to bump or fork to get updated as well, that's just another additional step that has to be taken. So I just want to be the grumpy German, just to keep nagging you. Think about all the users. Think about all the libraries that have to update.
Oh yeah, we are. Yeah, I think we really are making it literally as simple as it could be. But people still want to use a better API. Like one of the reasons people don't want to use render functions now in a lot of cases is because it's too complex.
Yeah, that is also one of the points that I forgot that I don't like.
but anyway, we don't have much time left. We have to move on to picks and wrap up, I believe. So before we move on to picks, do you, Thorsten, An, have anything that you'd like to plug, tell the people about, keeping in mind that this will probably be coming out maybe like, I don't know, 4 weeks from now, something like that.
Something like that.
Happy Easter. No, I don't. I don't think I have anything big going on.
Where can people find you?
Well, if you're listening from Germany, there will be meetups in Heidelberg and in Frankfurt, which I will be both joining in the middle of May, giving a talk at both. So I don't know the topic yet, but it will, of course, be very interesting. And also, if you haven't seen when you are listening to this, just starting yesterday, which was March 19th, the VueJS Amsterdam guys started releasing the talk videos for all the talks. So, and they are pumping them out one day at a time. So when you're listening to this, probably, hopefully, you will be able to go to YouTube and find days worth of listening to amazing Vue talks from the awesome VueJS Amsterdam conference that was in February. So check that out if you haven't already.
And what are you on Twitter? How do people find you on Twitter?
I'm Linus_Borg, pretty much like my GitHub name, but with a random underscore in it. Don't ask me why I ever did that.
What about you, An?
Well, no, I guess I have nothing big to talk about these days, but yeah, I made it kind of one of my goals in this 2019 to be less invisible or more visible in the community by, let's say, be more active in the Vue ecosystem, or go for those talks and meetups. Well, I'm reaching out for the organizer of Vue Barcelona for the road trips. Maybe I will speak at a conference or two this year.
I can definitely recommend the road trips. I did the one in Berlin last December or November, I think. And that was also my first bigger talk, and it was really great because it was 160 people, so it's not like this huge intimidating audience, but it's also not like 20 guys in an office in a normal meetup. So it was a nice step in between to a bigger real conference talk.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been hearing a lot of good things about the VueJS road trip as well. That's why I decided to
yeah, definitely do that. Yeah.
Right. And well, what else? Not much. Our company have also made it a target for this year as well to send people out and talk at conferences, like backend and frontend alike. So the chance for me to meet you guys in person is quite high this year.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. And speaking of visibility, did you mention how people can find you on Twitter?
Well, my name is Phan, and put not as a prefix, not Phan, and you find me on Twitter. The reason is simple, women. It's Phan.
Yeah, I've never asked you that. Why are you not Phan? His screen name is Phan on GitHub, and then not Phan on Twitter.
Well, I mean, Phan, the handle Phan had been grabbed by some other dudes on Twitter. So, well, I needed to be more creative when it comes to meta. So yeah, I just decided to put a not there instead of using the real Phan or underscore Phan or Phan 19 something. Just put a not. Not the best choice I made, but well.
Yeah,
good to know that story.
Twitter handle when I started on Twitter than I do now. So
we can do that on another episode where we all talk about like our embarrassing screen names and emails that we used to have.
Yeah.
Right.
I have a buttload of those. Yeah.
How someone managed to score like a 2-character Twitter handle, a 3-character is beyond me. I like,
Get in early.
but Twitter has been around forever, right? I mean, I don't know.
People buy them now.
Oh, all right. That makes sense. A lot of sense.
This episode is brought to you by Triplebyte. Applying to programming jobs sucks. You have to put the right keywords in your resume, you spend hours and hours on the phone screens and take-home projects, and that's assuming the company even responds to your application. Well, if you're a software engineer, Triplebyte can help. They work with over 400 top tech companies, from big names like Dropbox and Adobe to exciting startups. You do one brief online interview with them, and if you do well, you go straight to final interviews with the company on their platform. It's like the Common App for software developers. Triplebyte does not look at your resume or where you went to school. All they care about is if you can code. I've helped dozens of software developers with various credentials get jobs, and this looks like a terrific way for you to get in and get interviewed and get a job without a lot of the hassle and overhead. You can go check them out at triplebyte.com/view. That's triplebyte.com, byte as in 8 bits. As a special offer for listeners of this show, if you take a job through Triplebyte, they'll offer you a $1,000 signing bonus. All right, let's do some picks. Chris, do you want to show us how it's done?
Sure. So for On, I don't think you've done this before. Basically, what we do is we talk about like a couple random things that
Stuff we like.
It doesn't have to be, related to Vue. It doesn't have to be related to technology. Mine are definitely not, as you'll see, except for one. So my first pick is actually, speaking of greater visibility, I want to give a huge shout out to Phan, who I've been working with for years on the docs, but this is the first time we've actually heard each other's voices in a real-time conversation.
Yeah.
We've just been working online, and he's been incredible. He's one of the driving forces of the docs, not only setting the tone for the community, but also constantly improving explanations, finding things that don't make sense and making them better, investigating issues. Yeah, the docs would not be anything close to what they are without him. So yeah, big shout out to him.
That's so nice of you. Thank you, Chris.
You deserve it. You deserve it. You are definitely one of the two less often, or what is the word I'm looking for? Too infrequently sung hero of the docs, which people love.
He'll never look at you the same way again. It's like when you read a book and you have this idea of who the author is, and then you meet him in person, and it's like, oh, not what I expected.
Yeah, and something that you might not know about An that's kind of interesting is he's actually a published author for poetry.
A bit of correction. It's
not poetry?
It's not. It's like novels and stuff.
I thought you said you had a book of poetry as well.
I had a network of poetry, set up a website about poetry, but essays, short stories, and like fictions. So
poet and fiction author. Well, I think it's a big part of what makes you good at thinking about language and good at thinking about the docs.
Well, I'm not sure about that. My books are in Vietnamese, but then I get what you mean.
No, but you're still thinking deeply about language in a way that most people don't in any language, right?
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
My other pick is One Strange Rock on Netflix. It's in a lot of ways, it's what I kind of wished Cosmos was, like the new Cosmos. It felt much more like a spiritual successor to the original Cosmos, hosted by Carl Sagan. And I've been really, really enjoying it. It's a lot of fun and gives you some great perspective on humanity and this strange rock that we live in called Earth. And then my final pick is Flash Forward, which I might have talked about before, but they recently came out with a new season. It's just such a good podcast. It gives you little glimpses into a possible or not so possible future. Based on certain projections and, themes and science fiction. And it's just so fun and interesting and well-researched. It's a blast. So go check it out. That's Flash Forward. And those are all my picks.
Nice. I'm going to throw in with some picks here real quick, and then we'll have our guest hosts also jump in. My first pick, so I had been watching the Expanse TV series for a while. And after the second season, I was a little frustrated because I got into it in the middle of the second season. And so the first season was on Amazon Prime. The second season was on Hulu. but only the last 5 episodes. And so, of course, I didn't watch any of it on Hulu because I hadn't seen the other episodes. So it turned out then that it eventually went to Amazon Prime, and unbeknownst to me, Sci-Fi decided not to run the show anymore. And so I kept waiting around for season 3, and it finally showed up on Amazon because Amazon Prime Video picked up the series and continued it. So season 3's out now, and I really enjoyed that series. But I also then picked up the books on Audible. So I'm looking forward to listening to those. I have a trip down to Las Vegas this next week. I'm going to a conference down there, and I usually drive to Las Vegas. I will be this time. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to listening to books as I go. One other pick that I have, and this is something that I'm doing out there for the community, I kind of want to do a podcast tour, but I want to do it a little different, and I want to have more of a reason, I guess, for their conferences and stuff to have me show up. And so I'm building a podcasting booth, a portable podcasting booth. And by portable, meaning I'm going to have to make lots of trips out to my truck to get it all in. But anyway, there's a company called Buzzsprout that does podcasting tech or, software on the web. And at the last few podcasting conferences, they've built up a podcast booth. And when I stopped at their booth to talk to them, the person I wound up talking to, he basically said, "Oh, well, I'm just one of the programmers. Of course, you're my people, right?" So I asked him what their stack was, and he mentioned that their back end was Ruby on Rails. And I said, "Oh, well, have you heard of Ruby Rogues?" And he stopped and looked at me and said, "Oh, you're that guy." And turned out he was a listener of the show, got introduced to a bunch of those guys, and it turned out that those guys were the ones that built the booth. So I am working on a Kickstarter to build the booth and then do the podcast tour. And
that's exciting.
So
will it be a new podcast or your current podcasts?
Probably current podcasts, but I'll set up a separate feed for the tour. So what I'm hoping to do is build the booth, and then I'll probably start at NGConf just because it's here in Salt Lake City. And then I'm hoping to get to some of the other open source conferences. I'm going to miss VueConf. I just can't get it done in time for that. And my wife has I have a conference. I had a conflict, and so I couldn't make it to that. But anyway, so I'm hoping to do it at NGConf, and then I'm also hoping to get out to some of the other bigger open source conferences like OzCon and some of the, language specific ones. So if I can find another Vue event that I can drive to, or that they're willing to ship the booth out to, then we'll get out there as well. So so the first $1,000 is going to go to basically setting up the booth and getting it all built. And then after that, the rest of it's going to go into shipping and travel. And I'm hoping that the conferences will help me out with that so that I can get to more places more often. But we'll also invite our other friends who do shows. So if there are other Vue podcasts out there that you know of, maybe we could connect with Greg Pollock, and those guys from the other Vue podcasts that I know about, and just make that a success. So I'll have a link to that in the show notes. I picked this on Ruby Rogues, which actually goes out next week. So it'll definitely be live by the time this episode goes live. But just go check it out. And I think we'll probably set up a short link like devchat.tv/Kickstarter, and that'll take you to that as well. So anyway, that's what I'm doing. And I think it'd be a lot of fun and a great way to raise the profile of the shows. So
nice.
Thorsten, do you have some picks for us?
Yeah.
Oh, wait, real quick though. Did you hear, Chuck, about how Amazon Prime actually ended up picking up The Expanse?
No, I didn't.
Jeff Bezos watched it, and he basically just said no when it was canceled.
Oh, really? That's awesome.
So that's the advantage of being Jeff Bezos. When your favorite shows get canceled, you can just say,
buy it.
No, I don't think so.
Nice.
Okay, that's a nice story. So what are my picks? The first one is I know it's probably already out of theaters again, but I kind of missed it at first, and it's the animated Spider-Man movie Into the Spider-Verse, which totally didn't have any kind of promotion here in Germany, and I just learned about it on Twitter. Like people from all backgrounds, like celebrities, people from tech, all just like praising this movie as if it was the best movie ever.
What?
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Yeah, it's big here in Munich.
Yeah, I haven't seen any kind of like. I realized it was in the cinema in Germany, but I haven't seen any kind of like promotion for it, like in the streets or on TV or something. And it's really, really amazing. So, if you're in the US, you probably heard about it. Maybe you didn't. If you're from other countries, it's really amazing, and it really deserves all the praise that it got. The second pick would be 2 Chrome extensions, actually, which I also am probably pretty late to use. They are for GitHub, and they are called Octo-Tree and Octo-Linker. And what those do is, the first one gives you like a navigatable tree of a repository, so you don't have to like click through all of the pages to get to a nested file. You just get a nice sidebar where you can open a tree and navigate to like a file that is indefinitely deeply nested and stuff. It's pretty helpful to navigate the Vue CLI repository, because with all of the packages that we have, stuff is really hidden away really well. And the second package is actually turning import and require statements in files on github.com into links, so you can jump to those packages, which is also pretty amazing. I also wrote on Twitter that I don't realize how I ever worked on github.com without those 2, and I just have been using them for like a day or 2, but yeah. So definitely check those out. And third pick would be music.
What were their names again, real quick, Thorsten?
Octo-Tree and Octo-Linker. Octo, like
thanks.
the octopus, like the little Octo guy from GitHub.
Yeah, I use Octo-Tree, but I don't know Octo-Linker. I'm looking that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I use both of them, and I do agree. I mean, they change your developer's life forever.
Yeah, and the last pick would be music. I recently really enjoyed listening to the Fabric Presents mix by Bonobo, which is a like trip hoppy electronic R&B artist from the UK, who I've been enjoying for years, and he just has a new mix out, Fabric, which is pretty amazing. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So well, my picks. So the first thing is so most recently I read this book called Lincoln in the Battle, and this is 2017 Man Booker Prize winner, and it tells a story, the imagined story about Abraham Lincoln and his son. The fact that Lincoln's son William died when he was 10 or something, and the story is about the battle, the state after the one person has died but has not gone to the afterworld. So this is some imaginary setup of the kid in the battle, and how the other, let's say, souls or spirits in the same battle try to help him to get to the afterworld, because the battle is not good for children. And it's just an amazing book. I mean, I highly recommend reading it to anyone. I mean, since reading it, I keep on telling everyone about the book, because it's so awesome. And I think they creating a movie from this book as well. And I'm so looking forward to it. It's so good.
And you said it's called Lincoln in the Bardo?
In the Bardo, yeah. I'm not sure how. Is it Bardo or Bardo? I'm not sure. BAR.
I'm honestly not sure how to pronounce that either.
Yeah, it's a term. It's like a religious term about some state after death. The other pick is easy. I'm so looking forward to Adventure Endgame.
Oh yeah, I am as well.
Yeah. Looking forward to that one.
But what is it? Adventure?
Avengers.
Endgame.
Oh, the Avengers. Oh yeah.
Don't tell me you didn't watch the first part of the movie.
Yeah,
right.
I did. I watched them all. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, folks. Well, I'm going to push us to wrap up. Thanks, you guys, for coming and talking about this. And yeah, sorry to make us wrap early, but we will wrap up, and we will be back next week. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CacheFly.com to learn more.